Take a look at this chart tracking British emigration. For years, the UK government's official data reported that around 77,000 citizens were leaving the country annually. But recently, they quietly published a correction. It turns out they miscalculated. The real figure is roughly triple that amount, about 252,000 UK nationals packing up their lives in a single year. The demographic breakdown of who is leaving is what makes this a crisis. 3/4 of these immigrants are under 35. These are the most highly skilled, economically productive, and upwardly mobile people in the entire population. The top destinations for these young expats are Australia, Canada, and the UAE. They aren't fleeing a war zone or empty food shelves or a collapsing currency. They are choosing to walk away from a G7 nation and a historic financial center. This raises a fundamental question. Why does the economic math of staying in one of the world's wealthiest nations no longer add up for a 25-year-old? To understand what broke, we have to look back to 2007. Back then, the United Kingdom was a leading G7 economy and a global financial hub where prosperity and rising wages were the expectation. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and the government chose to implement austerity. The state decided to cut spending to balance the books, but they didn't cut luxuries. The government slashed funding for infrastructure projects, research, and adult skills training. They tightened their belts by canceling the investments required to actually grow the economy. 8 years later, the economy absorbed a second shock with the Brexit vote. The execution of leaving the European Union created total uncertainty regarding international trade rules. Before the referendum, business investment was growing at a healthy 6% a year. The morning after the result, that growth dropped to zero as companies froze their expansion plans. The compounding result of those choices is severe. Today, the average American worker is 28% more productive than a British worker, and a German worker is 14% more productive. British employees are doing their jobs with older tools, inside older buildings, in an economy that has consistently chosen to play defense rather than invest in growth. The outcome is a reality where wages technically rise, but the cost of living rises faster. For young workers, the standard of living is actively falling, trapping them in a state of permanent stagnation. If an economy has been stuck in neutral for nearly 2 decades, you would expect the streets to reflect that. Yet from the outside, the UK still looks wealthy. That appearance of prosperity is maintained almost entirely by one politically protected asset, residential property. This chart compares average house prices to annual wages. Historically, a home is considered affordable if it costs 3 to 4 times a buyer's salary. Britain blew past that threshold a generation ago. Today, the average home costs 7.7 times the median salary, and in parts of London, that multiplier reaches 25 times. It works like a game of musical chairs, where the people already sitting down get to vote on whether new chairs are added. Because the value of their homes depends on scarcity, older homeowners consistently vote against new developments, ensuring prices stay high for those already on the ladder. For a young person today, the math is brutal. Because they cannot afford to buy, they are trapped renting. They spend the bulk of their stagnant wages not building equity of their own, but directly funding the retirement plans of their landlords. This animation demonstrates a stealth tax known as fiscal drag. When the government freezes tax brackets during a period of inflation, a tiny cost of living raise pushes a worker into a higher bracket. Because of this, hundreds of thousands of young professionals now face effective marginal tax rates above 60%. If they earn a bit more, they actually take home less money. The state extracts this revenue to cover massive debts incurred during COVID and the energy crisis. With interest rates rising, the cost of simply servicing that debt has doubled, jumping from £40 billion a year to over £100 billion. Despite these high taxes, the services young people rely on are eroding. The National Health Service has over 7 million people on its waiting lists, and roughly 1 million working-age people have dropped out of the labor force entirely while waiting for treatment. Compare that to the state pension. Under a policy called the triple lock, pensions are guaranteed to rise every year, even when wages for workers stay flat. It is a politically untouchable transfer of wealth from younger, often poorer taxpayers to a wealthier, older demographic. Young people are left paying the highest tax burden in a generation, funding both the interest on massive national debts and the rising costs of senior benefits, even as the public services they actually use continue to fail. This cycle demonstrates how the decline becomes self-reinforcing. When ambitious young people leave, the tax base shrinks. A smaller tax base leads to failing services and higher taxes, making it even more rational for the next talented worker to leave. The mechanism driving this loop is a 5-year political election cycle. Because older citizens turn out to vote at double the rate of the youth, politicians will consistently prioritize the immediate wealth of retirees over the long-term investments that are required to keep a country competitive. This is a warning for every developed nation. From the housing markets in Canada and Australia to the national debt in the United States, the same generational trap is being set. If a nation's math no longer works for a 25-year-old, the future of that economy will eventually pack its